More than 56 million children are starting a new school year that looks entirely different than any other, with temperature checks, social distancing in the classroom, cafeteria, and on the playground. Not to mention some using kitchens as classrooms, with parents stepping up to teach and tutor. University campuses don't look the same either, with roughly 20 million college students in this country experiencing a different kind of higher learning. This pandemic has pushed so many American families to make what feel like impossible choices between school, work, and finances. Decisions that carry a heavy mental load. So how do you navigate this unprecedented reality? Well, we've gathered a wide range of experts to give you the facts on what we know, what resources exist for students, and how you can mentally handle this situation. And of course, we're here to answer your questions on this, our first all-day town hall, Coronavirus and the Classroom, a collaboration with Common Sense. I'm joined now by my colleagues, Sheinelle Jones and Jenna Hager, who will be a part of this special hour. Sheinelle is talking to experts about the best resources for families navigating the economic challenges of distance learning. And Jenna's going to lead a conversation on the impact all of this is having on the mental health of families and educators as well. First, though, a look at the state of education today. Schools across the country are gearing up for a new academic year, and some are already back in session. But there are still many decisions to be made about the best ways to move forward. School is back in session, but not everything is back to normal.
It's a lot more precautions. It's just kind of a new normal until we get a vaccine for this virus.
Districts across the country are racing against the clock to make critical decisions for a safe start to the year. But with no national guidelines to follow, the debate between opening the classroom or continuing distance learning at home rages on. Most states, even districts, have been left to come up with their own plans.
Whether you go in person or virtually, you're always going to have somebody upset with you.
In Tennessee, Superintendent Dr. Joris Ray received threats after deciding to keep school doors closed for the first few weeks of the year.
No one's going to deter me, even threats going to keep me for keeping our students safe. That's what it's about.
In Georgia, one school already in session shut down temporarily this week after 9 students tested positive for the virus. Photos of its packed hallways sparking backlash online last week. Meanwhile, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo gave the go-ahead for schools to open classrooms last week.
Our viral transmission rate in New York is one of the lowest in the nation. Yes, you can reopen if you have a smart plan.
But some teachers in New York City, the largest school district in the country, are opposed to the decision. And in other districts, teachers are taking to the streets. One Jacksonville, Florida educator wrote a mock obituary that went viral, saying in part, she returned to work, did her best to handle all the roles placed on her shoulders, but ultimately succumbed to the ignorance of those in power. In other areas, many families who have faced economic and educational challenges with distance learning are in favor of students in class.
I really don't think that there's a substitute for what teachers do and the heart that they pour into kids. There's no replacing that.
As the countdown continues, there are some who are looking past the fall and imagining a new future for schools.
One of the things that we've been exploring with educators is this idea that every space in the school should be used for learning, even the hallways. We've now started making the space that was corridor space now part of the learning space. We basically create a much larger environment, and rather than transitioning to art, to gym, to cafeteria, to recess, to special ed, all of those activities are now within the learning suite.
For now, schools are focused on the coming weeks and doing what they can to protect students right now. My guest today, Dr. Michael Hinojosa, the superintendent of the Dallas Independent School District, and Dr. Jennifer Nuzzo, an epidemiologist and senior scholar at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. A big thanks to both of you for being with me. Dr. Hinojosa, let me start with you. Can you paint a picture of the challenges, the unique challenges that school districts are facing right now when it comes to starting the new year? What makes this process so difficult?
Well, there are a lot of things that make it extremely challenging. First of all and foremost is the mixed messages that we're getting, sometimes from the federal officials to the state officials to our local health officials about what is dangerous and what is not dangerous, and even the different interpretations of social distancing. And can you do it on a bus? Can you do it in a classroom? How does plexiglass help you? What do masks do? What do face coverings do? And the fact that we're getting mixed messages is really creating challenges for teachers, for custodians, for our families. They're confused about, well, what is the right answer? And so when you have such a huge new normal, and then you have conflicting information, it really creates challenges. And particularly in a city like Dallas. Dallas is really a blue city in a purple county in a red state. And so all of the political messages are different, and it just makes it, when you're really worried about safety, how do you execute on the data that sometimes continues to shift? And that's probably the biggest challenge that me and my peers have in trying to make this a safe environment.
Let me ask you both, and Dr. Nuzzo, I'll start with you here. Some people feel it's still too soon for schools to reopen. What's the argument for getting students back in the classroom sooner rather than later?
Well, I mean, I think in much of the country, it probably is too soon to reopen, just given the epidemics that we're seeing and the fact that these case numbers are really out of control. They're not getting down to a point where it would be much easier to open schools, given all of the constraints and the mixed messages and all of the realities that school districts have to deal with and the challenges. But that's really unfortunate because there really is no replacement for in-school education, in-classroom education, particularly for younger students that developmentally need that social interaction and all of the benefits that being in a same room with their peers and their teacher can provide. So a lot's at stake. And it's urgent that we get our epidemic to the point where we can feel more confident about reopening schools safely.
Craig, if you don't mind, from my perspective, I agree. We were supposed to start on August the 17th, but we determined it's just not safe right now. So I got my school board to support me in moving it to September the 8th, and then we'll have to look at the data. Dallas County health numbers were improving significantly last week, but then over the weekend, we went back up. And just when we thought we were getting a little bit better, then we have another spike. And so luckily we have until September before we actually start. And then we'll have to monitor, just like we're monitoring what's happening in Georgia right now, and see how we respond. So it is not safe yet, and we'll just have to keep monitoring this as we go.
Dr. Nuzzo, before we move into our viewer questions, when we use that word safe, how do we quantify that? I mean, what's safe enough to open a school district?
Sure. Well, it's a little bit tough because we don't really have great metrics. The best examples that we have to guide us really come from other countries that have gone before us, other countries that are further along in their epidemics and have been able to reopen schools and have largely done so without negative consequences. But all of those countries were at places in their epidemics where the number of cases being reported per capita were much lower than that where many states are seeing. So we think we have to, in most states, bring the case numbers down further. The issue of safety is probably more aimed at protecting the adults in the lives of the children. We increasingly are learning that children can get this virus, which of course always raises worries. But so far, the evidence continues to suggest that they are not nearly as severely affected by the virus as adults. So the prospects of safety are really to protect the teachers and the staff in the school systems, and then also the adults that the children may return to at the end of the day. Of course, no risk or low risk in children is not no risk. And of course, parents are going to be worried about the safety of their children regardless. And they're going to be doing the calculation, is it worth it to us as a family to send my child to school, even if the risk may be small. Where everybody draws the line is different, which I think adds to the challenge.
Well, let's get into some of these viewer questions because there are a slew of them. The first one comes from a viewer. It was submitted on Instagram. Here's the question. My son starts pre-K this year. Would it be safe to send him to school rather than e-learning? Dr. Nuzzo, this goes to the heart of what we were just talking about.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, there's a lot of missing information in order to be able to answer that question. But clearly, the safest thing for anybody right now is to stay home. But when we're thinking about sending children to school, it's a question of balancing the benefits and the risks. And particularly when we're talking about preschool, I have a preschooler, so I know this firsthand. The benefits of being in school are quite high. It's really hard to e-learn at the preschool age. However, depending on where you live, it just may not be worth it when you also factor in the risks. So that's really the challenge there.
Here's another viewer question from a parent. They're asking, I have a child starting school and just had a newborn. How do I protect my newborn while my oldest is in school? Dr. Nuzzo, I'll send that one your way.
Yeah, that is a challenge. And I think that goes into the kind of risk-benefit calculation that every family does, which is what are your family vulnerabilities? Still, pediatric serious outcomes from this disease have been less frequently reported than in adults. However, we do know that children, particularly young infants, say under the age of 12 months, if there are to be serious consequences, it tends to be in that age group. So I can see why a family would be concerned in that circumstance. The same things that you do to try to reduce your exposure to the virus. So you maintain physical distance, you wash your hands, you wear a mask as much as possible. It's really hard when you have mixed age kids because it's very hard to kind of keep that distance. But I would certainly, if the child's coming home, wash hands and try not to get too close to the newborn as much as possible.
Dr. Hinojosa, I mean, are there other factors that parents should be taking into consideration as they decide whether to do distance learning or not? How can they make sure they're making the best decision for their family?
Well, yes, Craig. It's obviously an individual family choice, and you have to take into consideration, what the rest of the family situation is. And some of our parents, 92% of our parents are economically disadvantaged, and they don't have the opportunity to work from home. So they're the ones that work in the hotels and the restaurants and in construction. And if they're going to have a salary and income, they need to be able to make sure that they have an opportunity for their students to be involved in something that is meaningful and productive. They also need to weigh what's the quality of the instruction. When we started this, we all put it together overnight. And quite honestly, what we did back in the spring wasn't as high a quality as it should have been. But now we've trained our teachers on how to use Zoom lessons, Google Classroom, and now how do you teach science in this context? And so a lot of our parents are down to about 50% that want on-campus instruction versus 50% that don't. But they don't have to decide until August the 25th. Now, students with special needs and students with second language needs, those are the most difficult. But high school students, can they learn virtually? Those are the kind of decisions that parents need to weigh. In addition to the safety is what kind of quality instruction. There's going to be a learning loss. We haven't seen our kids since March. And there's the mental health issues. A lot of these families, a lot of these parents depend on the counselors and teachers to help students build relationships with each other. So you have to weigh all of those decisions. And it's an individual family choice. But the consequences are significant on either end. That's why people are struggling with this right now.
Yeah, in my own home. The next question is from Instagram. Do children need to wear masks and stay 6 feet apart during outdoor recess, Dr. Nuzzo?
Yeah, I mean, we're less worried about outdoors than we are indoors, fortunately. And so I think that, kids can be kids in recess. Obviously, we try to keep the distance as much as possible. And I think masks are good. I sent my son to camp this summer. They didn't wear masks outside, but they did indoors. And I felt comfortable with that. But again, I mean, it depends on the amount of physical space that they have to play in and whether it's possible to kind of keep general distance and not be on top of each other. If that's not really possible, then I think masks will add a layer of safety to that.
Okay, we've got a question here. This is another viewer video. Let's take a look.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Hanrahan. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I am mother to 2 children with autism. And my question is, how do school districts plan to support special needs children, whether that's on campus or with distance learning?
Dr. Hinojosa, you were just talking about special needs students. What's the plan?
Well, and that's what makes it very complex, because by definition, special education is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So it depends on the nature of the severity. With students with autism, they need to have interaction, but also this is one of the most challenging areas. When we have medically fragile student, by definition, they have to be close to the students. The teachers have to be, they cannot socially distance. So they have to, the proximity is very important, that they're able to service the students. And so I think it needs to be an individual plan that the parent, the teacher, and the principal can work out. This is a place where we take high priority in trying to, especially for our students who have special needs, to bring them in first. They're the ones that need to have those direct services. So as we spread out, as 50% of our parents have said they want to come to school, we're going to prioritize special education. And then luckily 70% of our teachers have said they're willing to come back. So we got to have the right kinds of teachers. So special needs is our top priority. They'll be our first students that we find spaces for in a school. And so that's going to be number one. And then we'll start filling in with our other students.
Dr. Hinojosa, Dr. Nuzzo, what a great conversation. Thank you. Thank you so much for your insights, your expertise. Thanks for sharing that with us. Do appreciate you. Coming up next, how the inequality gap in education has only gotten worse as a result of COVID-19, and what parents and teachers can do to help students close that gap. We'll be back with our special Today All Day Town Hall, Coronavirus and the Classroom.
New analysis released by Common Sense Media this summer found that a full 15 to 16 million public school students across the United States live in households without adequate internet access or computing devices to facilitate distance learning. And other students from preschool to college age may have a difficult time learning because basic needs like meals might not be met if schools are closed. Take a look at one young woman's story.
There is a very, very strong digital divide in education, and we've known that for years, and it's a problem we unfortunately never wanted to talk about. What this pandemic did was bring the same issues communities of color and low-income communities have faced for generations to light. There was always a huge disparity in access to resources for students in wealthier versus poorer districts. We know our schools are underfunded.
This is Layla Nasher. She is the valedictorian of her class. She just finished high school at a public charter school in Detroit. She is heading off to Harvard this fall.
Say it was my dream school that I never really wanted to acknowledge for years, just because I never thought I'd be able to do it because of my background. But it was a very, very underfunded school. Most of our teachers are permanent substitutes. We don't have extracurricular opportunities. We don't have advanced academic opportunities, so I just thought it wasn't possible for me to even apply to a school like Harvard.
At the start of the pandemic, Layla lived with 3 other siblings that were remote learning at the same time.
Miraculously, my school gave us Chromebooks, which I was surprised they gave us, considering they never seemed to have money for technology before the pandemic. It was really hard for my sister, my little brother, and I, because for the first month, my little brother and I had to share the same Chromebook.
Even among states with the smallest divides, 1 in 4 students do not have an adequate internet connection or device.
And now, because of Corona, God, I'm even more terrified, because even though we will be freshmen, all classes will be virtual. I don't know how that's gonna look. I don't have a laptop yet. And, we're going to have to start registering for classes in a couple of weeks. So I need a laptop to apply for classes and to apply for freshman seminars. I am scared, but I am also excited, just because, the school year is going to look crazy different.
The school year will look different. One of the campuses adapting to the times is Lane College, a historically black college in Tennessee.
We just learned things this year. I mean, the fact that our faculty turned on a dime over spring break and took courses that they had planned to deliver face-to-face. They took those classes and converted those classes to online.
Dr. Hampton worked with school officials to make Lane College into a hybrid campus for the coming fall semester.
In my mind, as I think about it, two inequalities that have been amplified in the COVID crisis. One is finances, and the other is the digital divide. Finances is twofold. It's family finances. Our students' families' ability to be able to afford a higher education. When we ask our students what were their greatest needs, from home, studying at home remotely, 78% of our students communicated to us that food was their number one concern. 73% of our students indicated that the next level was housing.
Dr. Hampton says he's committed to ensuring his students and institution come out stronger on the other side of this pandemic.
We are concerned about the health and safety of our students and our faculty and our staff, but we're focused on our mission, and that is that developing the whole student, that student might go out and achieve their dream. I started preaching, so forgive me for preaching, but we will be better at the end of this. We are better as an institution, and our students will continue to rise higher and higher.
There are certainly so many layers to this. I want to dive in deeper now into this topic, and we have three experts joining us to help make sense of all of the information we just heard. We have Amina Vazula. She joins us as part of our collaboration with Common Sense. She is the organization's Digital Equity Council. We have Dr. Logan Hampton, who is the president of Lane College, an HBCU in Jackson, Tennessee. And finally, Dominique Jones, the executive director of the Boys and Girls Club in Harlem. Thank you all of you for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amina, let me start with you. You've been working, I know, on digital equity issues for a very long time now. Parents and students all over the country are just concerned about distance learning, particularly for families who are having financial challenges. Can you give us a couple of solutions that you can think of to help close the digital divide?
I mean, first and foremost, we've got to fund support for families and for teachers and for their students to be able to access connectivity and devices. The federal government can step in with these funds. We recently did a report that estimated that the cost of closing this digital divide in its first year would be $6 to $11 billion. And those funds are within reach for Congress, especially considering that this is directly related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and there is an opportunity for that level of funding to flow through a relief package to states, schools, and families.
That's a good one. In the meantime, Dominique, we know there are families who are struggling. I know you've been in the trenches for a while now as director of the Boys and Girls Club in Harlem, helping young people during these uncertain times. What work is being done in your community in an effort to bridge the divide? I would say it's almost as if we had a test run at the end of last school year, and now here we are again. You know, I'm right with them. There's so many of us who are trying to figure out what's going to happen. What can you tell us as far as the support in the communities?
Well, Boys and Girls Clubs across the country have really helped to step in to fill the void where there was lack of access for children during the early part of the pandemic. They opened their centers to be able to provide technology access, but also help families connect with emergency resources such as food, which Dr. Logan talked about, as well as other wraparound supports that are essential. We're all preparing now. I know Boys and Girls Club of Harlem is preparing for this new school year and how we can help to address the inequity that exists. A lot of our families, they may have access to a computer, but they don't have access to internet. A lot of our families, really have to go to work and need care. So our position as Boys and Girls Clubs is to really be mission focused and be able to provide support to all the children that need us the most so that they can achieve in school.
Absolutely. I mean, we're trying to focus on solutions because, again, there are just so many layers to this. And I know you talked about funding, and in some of the surveys that you've done with Common Sense, you actually asked students what they're most concerned about for the new school year. What were some of the answers that stuck out to you?
I think first and foremost, kids are concerned about their own health, their family's health, the financial security of their family, whether or not they'll have food, whether or not they'll have a roof over their head. And then certainly a lot of kids are saying it's difficult to get online. It's difficult to connect with their teachers. It's difficult to connect with the wraparound services that they were used to having when they were in school.
Let me go ahead and bring you in here, Dr. Hampton. You come from the world of higher education, and you're also a leading historical Black college during this time. Since we're focusing on the inequalities in education, what's your thought when it comes to our college students?
Well, as we ended the semester this past spring due to COVID-19, we got a real snapshot of the challenges that our students would experience. We did a pulse survey of our students and found that 78% of our students were food insecure, 73% of our students were housing insecure. In our conversations with them about their digital devices, most of our students either had a digital device and some access to internet. Many of our students had neither. So we learned that our students would need to return to campus over the course of the summer. We interviewed our students or did our surveys of students, asked the simple question, how would you like to return? We learned that 75% of our students would like to return. But we wanted to kind of get a sense that we could do it safely, and so we started to ask some questions about how they were, in fact, behaving over the course of the summer. And we learned that 94% of our students were washing their hands regularly or more than they normally did. We learned that 84% of our students were social distancing. And we learned that 74% of our students were wearing their mask. And so we determined that, okay, we believe that we could put together a strategy to bring our students back to campus so that we could provide for them our holistic wraparound services to help them.
So essentially, it's interesting to me that you mentioned, a lot of younger elementary teachers and teachers in lower education don't want to go back to school. They're afraid. So was it not that way for the college campus? And at this point, then, they're going to school, in their dorms since they're doing, remote learning? How are you working that out?
Yes, I mean, we have a great deal of concern on our campus at all levels, from the administration to the faculty to the staff to the students. We're all concerned about COVID-19 and its potential impact on us individually and upon our scholars and our institution. However, our faculty reasoned that the best way for them to deliver education would be to do it face-to-face. They also thought that, but to be safe, that they needed to, in fact, deliver most of the classes online. So as we return this fall, about 80% of our classes are being offered online, and then about 40% are being offered as a hybrid or face-to-face. About 20% are being offered just purely face-to-face. We've limited the number of students that are on campus. Many of our residence halls are single rooms. As students return for this fall, we have developed every classroom in such a way that students are 10 feet away from the faculty member and 6 feet away from one another. And we're asking all of our scholars, all of our faculty and our staff to practice WWSS. That is, wear your mask, wash your hands, social distance, and self-check any and every time that you are around other people.
I want to get to some viewer questions, but first let me ask you about helping our kids build resilience in the midst of this. Dominique, let me bring you in here. How do you help young people manage in these uncertain times and provide them with, things like after-school care, supplies, and devices, and make sure that they're safe in your centers? How do you do that right now?
Well, I think the first part is you just have to be there. You have to open your doors and you understand the risk and you practice all the precautions. But ultimately, our children, our families, our teens are looking for a constant presence in their community that can help them in this really unprecedented moment for them so that they can begin to process.
All right, let's get into some of our viewer questions. Our first video submission is from Mecky from Brooklyn, New York. Let's take a listen.
Hi, I'm Mecky, and I have 2 children. I live in Brooklyn, New York. And as we head into fall, a question that comes to mind for me is, how are children who don't have access to reliable internet or even a laptop, how are we going to solve for that problem? How are they going to get onto their classes for virtual learning? And again, if they don't have laptops or reliable Wi-Fi, I'm just wondering what the plan is for those children. Thanks.
That's a phenomenal question. Let me direct this to Amina, since I know you've really been trying to understand this digital divide and working on digital equity issues. How would you respond to Mecky's concern?
So what many states and schools have already started doing, starting back in the spring, is trying to do an assessment of the need. You know, how many students lack access to a device? How many students lack access to connectivity? Not just connectivity, but connectivity that can deliver high quality distance learning. Once they have those assessments in place, school districts are able to feed that information to officials at the state level. They can start to come up with a plan as to how they can actually address those numbers and prioritize getting laptops purchased and assessing where they can get connectivity. So some schools have used laptops, some schools have used tablets, some schools have used hotspots, some schools are working with fixed wireline providers to be able to wire up a home. So there's a whole suite of options that are available to schools. Obviously, all of this takes support from the school district, from the state, and from the federal level to ensure that there's enough funding to deliver all of these resources to the students that need it most. In the spring, what we saw was schools using really traditional methods to be able to do some kind of distance learning. So that was paper packets. Going into a potential full year of distance learning, that's not going to be enough to deliver equitable education access. So it's going to be really critical that the good work that schools and states have done to assess their need is actually met with support to be able to deliver those resources to kids who need them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's go to our next question. It's a viewer question from Instagram. It's from A. Harvey O. He asks, how do I help my high school senior create self-disciplined study habits that will follow him to college, whatever that will look like? How do I monitor him without being helicopter mom? That's a good question. Let me direct this one towards Dominique.
Well, I think, young people are establishing their own independence, particularly in high school. But again, it goes back to establishing routine, schedule, and expectations. And this is a unique time to develop some of the study skills that are going to be essential in going to college. I also think that the remote learning also has to enable young people, and it pushes young people to organize themselves. So part of it is, mom, establish expectations, what you want to see, when you want to see it, and how you want to see it. And then create a space where they can actually do that. So if it is at home, create a study space and give the resources available for them to make that happen. But if you're not lacking that, work with organizations like Boys and Girls Clubs and other community groups to create that opportunity for them as well. But at the end of the day, it's about you just making sure that they're meeting the benchmark and coming in when you need to come in to kind of help push them in the right direction. I know that's what I needed as a high school student preparing to go to college, and I think that's what most kids needed, and now more than ever.
That's a good response. And it takes a village, you're right. So if they have to come to your center to get that help, then so be it. Our next question is from Allison on Facebook. I'd love to direct this question to Dr. Hampton. It says, as we look to the fall, many universities are turning to virtual instruction. Is distance learning really worth what can sometimes be, this is a good question, a 30, 40, 50K price tag? Should these families continue to pay these hefty premiums or have their kids go to a community college that would cost less?
Well, I'm pleased to say that Lane College has a very affordable tuition and fees. Our tuition and fee rates often compete with state institutions. We're proud to be a historically black college to be able to offer an affordable access to our students. But we also offer wraparound services that our students need on our campus. Our students need all that we offer. They need the residential experience. They need the wraparound services. They need the holistic counseling. They need the trauma-informed counseling. They need access to our labs. And we're able to provide that on campus as well as we're able to provide that to students online. So yes, it is yet affordable, and students should enroll in college this semester at this time, because I'm afraid that if students stop out, if they stay out, that they will be distracted and they may never return and get the opportunity to have a chance to earn $1 million more. That is what we learned that a college degree will offer our students. And our students who arrive on our campus that are already with educational deficits and financial deficits, they need every advantage that they can get. And a higher education provides for them that advantage. They should enroll this fall.
All right, I feel your passion on that one. All right, we have another question from Instagram from user Timber3. She writes, I work in surgery, a high-risk area, and my role to help people is essential. How are single working parents going to provide for their families if they can't work because the kids are home from school? I can't be two places at once, and most employers won't accommodate fluctuating schedules. What other resources exist for people in my situation? Where do I go? Dominique, let me have you answer that question. This is a phenomenal question. There are so many parents, as you know, who are struggling right now for their kids.
Well, I would just say to you that Boys and Girls Club, other youth development organizations across the country are gearing up to become not just after school, but truly out of school time organizations operating all day. We know many schools are moving into hybrid schedules, staggered schedules. And so our organizations are really trying to step into that gap and be able to provide distance learning at our own facilities using our technology, using our internet access, but also wrap around essential enrichment that we know makes the difference between a young person not excelling in school and excelling in school. So we're going to be offering cultural arts programs, STEM programs, just like they're doing over there at Lane. We're definitely going to be doing more to wrap around resources to our children and ultimately to our families, because we know childcare is essential. And, I think that, our schools are educating our kids, but we have to be honest. There were places where kids were fed. There were places where kids got a lot of other human services and resources that were essential to them being family being successful. We, too, do that work at Boys and Girls Clubs across this country and most definitely in Harlem. And we welcome this opportunity because it's consistent with our mission to provide access and opportunities for youth to achieve their full potential.
Well, I know that's certainly a relief to a lot of parents. We could talk for another hour, quite frankly, about the digital divide and inequalities in education, but I really hope that this will continue to further the conversation. So let me thank our panelists for joining us today. Thank you, Amina, Dr. Logan Hampton, and Dominique Jones. Thank you guys so much for your time today. And again, I hope the conversation continues. Coming up next, Jenna Bush Hager on how to cope with the school year ahead and all of the demands it may put on a family.
Wide Open School is an easy-to-use online resource to support families and teachers in a school year unlike any other. Get advice, tips, and how-tos about distance learning in the Family and Teacher Center. You'll find a daily plan with free learning activities to keep kids engaged. Hand-picked by the experts at Common Sense. Learn from anywhere. Join us at wideopenschool.org.
Welcome back to our Coronavirus in the Classroom Town Hall. I'm Jenna Bush Hager. We've heard all about the ways this school year is going to look and feel different for kids of all ages and backgrounds, but we can't ignore how all of these changes will affect our kids and our own mental health, whether our kids are learning remotely or in person. So lucky for all of us, we have a panel of mental health professionals who will help shed some light on these issues and what parents can do to help kids with these stressors. So first up, we have Dr. Stephanie Lee, a clinical psychologist with the Child Mind Institute. We also have Dr. Allison Cantor-Agliata, a psychologist and former head of middle school in Tampa, Florida, God bless her, and Tom Kirstein, a psychotherapist and family counselor. Thank you guys so much for joining me. We have a ton of viewer questions to get to, no surprise there. But to start, one thing that seems to be on every parent's mind is how this will affect our children's development. So Dr. Lee, let me start with you. What will a prolonged lack of socialization and social distancing with friends and teachers and others do to our kids' development? And how can we as parents try to make up for it if we can?
It's a great question, Jenna, and parents really deserve a lot of support and a lot of empathy around these challenging times and this challenging situation. You know, we don't know exactly what this type of crisis will do to our kids in terms of social development, but we do know that kids are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for. And kids are even more resilient than adults. And so what we want to really try to do is make sure that parents are getting as targeted as possible, making sure that they're being specific in the areas that they want to build skills in kids, and so that they're not focusing on everything at once, because that can be too overwhelming.
That's such good advice. So Tom, this next question is for you. I know I can speak for a lot of parents who used to turn to technology when we needed a break, when we were working and needed a breath. But now our kids are on the computers for a lifeline to school and to their friends. So what do we do as parents to limit that amount of screen time?
Well, that's been the problem. Even in the spring, when coronavirus started, I was getting calls in my office from a lot of parents. The kids were spending so much more time than they were previously, and it was already a problem before that. In fact, an organization called the Parents Together put out something a few weeks ago suggesting that kids are spending 500% more time on screens. So the average kid was spending, like 4% of kids were spending 6 hours a day. Since coronavirus, 26% of kids were spending 4 hours, 6 hours or more per day. So what we need to do going into September, it looks like there's going to be sort of a hybrid form of education from what I'm seeing, where kids are going to be doing school-based learning at home. And the best thing that we could do, best advice I can give to any parent, is make sure that your kids are not in their bedrooms on their computers. Let them be in a central location, and make sure that the phones are nowhere near them. And I've seen that when the phones are near them, the teacher can't see them through the screen, and they're getting distracted by their Snapchat, their Instagram, and everything else. So we need to make those parameters. We have to put those in place immediately.
I mean, we also know that sometimes too much sitting in front of a screen can not be a great thing. It can be depressive for our children. So I think it's important that we tell our kids, like, all right, maybe go outside now, or let's play a game. Dr. Agliata, there have been so many articles I've read and sent them to friends about how stressed parents are when they're trying to balance work with parenting and homeschooling. So kids can feel our anxieties. And so what can we do to make sure that we are our best selves for our children?
That's a great question, Jenna. You know, I always say children are just little people, right? So one of the things we have to remember is that we are role modeling as parents stress management. This is a stressful time, not just for our kids, but for parents as well. We're kind of being asked to do the impossible between online school or going back to school and working and maintaining our jobs and our own personal lives. So it's important that we take the time to have good self-care. You know, the first thing we typically do is kind of let those things fall away when we're under stress, when really what we need to do is concentrate on, getting our correct amount of sleep, eating well, making sure that we're moving and exercising. And these are the things, again, that we'll be role modeling for our children as they learn to manage the stress level as well.
Good advice. Okay, we now have tons of viewers' questions that we have to get to. So Dr. Lee, this one's from you. This is Mom Erin Sowa. She lives in Severna Park, Maryland. Let's see what she has to say.
My rising first and second grader will be going back to school 100% virtually, as many in the U.S. My question, once they do go back formally to school face-to-face all day, how long will it take these kids to get up to speed mentally and on grade level?
Okay, Dr. Lee.
So a really, really great question, and one that I think will depend on the child and depend on the situation. We can expect some regression, and we can expect that the gradual transition back will take time. Some kids, what you're going to find is that they're going to be pretty quick, and they're going to find that this will be a quick transition and one that they've been waiting for. Some other kids that who might not have been experiencing the same social demands or academic demands virtually will have a harder time adjusting back, and they will need more resources and supports, but it will be important for parents to make sure that they open up a dialogue with their children to make sure they know we're here, we're available, we can be that support for you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, now Dr. Agliata, this one comes from Christy. She's from Simpsonville, South Carolina.
Our 11-year-old autistic son has social anxiety disorder and has loved e-learning for the last 5 months. With more e-learning coming up this year, we're afraid he's never going to leave home again. What suggestions do you have for us so we can make sure he's not totally cut off from the rest of the world?
Such a good question, Dr. Agliata.
Yes, it is. You know, every child has different needs, and so dependent on their strengths and their weaknesses is what I think you should focus your priorities on. So if your child has social anxiety, obviously the one thing you want to make sure they are not cut off from the rest of the world and that they do maintain some social connections. You know, as Dr. Lee mentioned, children will transition back according to their own strengths and weaknesses. Most things are on a bell curve. So the majority of our students will be very resilient. Children typically are, and they'll bounce back because this is a temporary situation, and we need to keep reminding them of that. But for those who already have the propensity for a social anxiety or other concerns, let that be the priority to keep them FaceTiming with friends, have socially distant social interactions if that is appropriate for your family, and making sure that you keep that at the forefront of what you're working on for your family.
Mm-hmm. Tom, this is a question for you. It's from Debbie Bidwell in Chicago, Illinois.
I have 2 high schoolers, a 9th grader and 11th grader, who chose hybrid over online learning. In a time of such uncertainty, when they ask me, Mom, did I make the right decision? What am I supposed to say?
Thanks for your question. Well, you know what? I'm glad that they're taking that risk because, you know, from the statistics that I've seen, it seems that, you know, kids that are of school age, learning ages, they're not as likely to have anything, you know, detrimental or fatal happen from coronavirus. So I think it's a good idea that they do both because we want our kids, particularly in the teenage years, to have that social interaction with their peers. And you have to remember, so as human beings, that is in our DNA. We are social, emotional beings. We are meant to be face-to-face with one another, connecting with one another. That's an important part of education. I know our kids have to learn and they got to learn the subject matter, but I applaud them for that and just tell them to be smart, wear their masks in the hallways, practice social distancing, and hope that everything will work out for the best. I think if you left them home entirely, the consequences would be worse down the road in terms of social and emotional abilities and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Agliata, here's another question. This is from, as you said earlier, teachers are also feeling taxed right now, teachers and parents. You told me that before we started. So this is actually from a teacher. Her name is Pamela Montgomery, and she's in Miami, Florida.
I've been teaching for Miami-Dade County Public School for over 25 years. What resources will be put in place for those students who are lacking socialization skills as well as dealing with anxiety during this pandemic time?
Such an important question.
It is. And, you know, first of all, let me say just a huge kudos to all of the teachers out there who are returning to school, whether it be online or in person. They absolutely are the superheroes of our world right now, you know, along with our medical folks. So it's really important that we provide the support necessary to our educators as they return. That said, you know, what is available to your students and to your faculty for that matter really is dependent on your district or your school in particular. So, you know, the local people in your area will have the answers to that, but most places do have psychologists, mental health counselors, support within the school systems to help those students who are having difficulty. And that goes for online students as well. There is no reason that they can't get the support they need through Zoom or some other form of online support platform during these times. So both online and in person, those things should be available by your local schools.
Yeah, so if you notice that your child is having difficulty, do you reach out to the school counselor and say, you know, can Can we set up a Zoom meeting?
Absolutely. Yes. Be your child's best advocate and make sure that you're asking questions. I always say the worst thing they can say is, no, we don't have that available. So make sure that you're asking and seeing what your resources are ahead of time. If you have a concern, it's great to let the teacher know in particular. Teachers can't help if they don't know what's going on. So give them the information they need to best help meet your child's needs.
Okay, Tom, here's another question. This is from Nicole Merritt. She's also in Florida, in Tampa.
I've noticed that my and my kids' pandemic-produced output, it's a little less stellar than our best, but it's all that we've kind of got to give. Do educators and health experts agree that these days that's more than enough?
Yeah, I mean, that's such an important one.
Yeah, well, that's the concern. If you talk about the academic output, some of the research that I've put together, I just have a new book that came out last week called Disconnected, and it talks actually about computer-based learning prior to coronavirus. And a lot of the research shows that schools that lean too heavily on computer-based learning, that the test scores and the actual performances of kids isn't as great. So I expect that the more that we're using computers for learning, that the less the output is going to be. And I think what we're going to need to do is lean on parents to supplement that at home in the evenings, and parents are just going to have to, take some time out of their day, because I don't see how it's possible, for a teacher to get all of the academic information across to a kid and for a child to absorb all of that. But we can only do the best we can. So I think the hybrid model will work for now, and I do believe that our kids will catch up.
Yeah, and I think what you said is like the grace for ourselves and for our kids, maybe not to put so much pressure on ourselves during this time. I think that's really also important. Dr. Agalati, this question comes from Jennifer Castillo in Miami, Florida.
How can I get my restless 4-year-old to stay more engaged and focused on her virtual classes?
Help. I have a 5-year-old. Please help.
Yeah, so, focus and attention is obviously a developmental skill. So dependent on the child's age, obviously a 4-year-old is not going to maintain the attention of a 12-year-old or a high schooler. So I think the first thing we need to change is expectations of our students. When they are little, as we were talking before, the show started, we really need to make sure that those are in limited quantities, both for their own good in terms of socialization, movement, exercise, and to be able to sustain attention. We obviously want our children to grow and meet the expectations of their educators, but at the same time, educators know what is appropriate for small children, and having them for hours on end doing online learning is not going to be appropriate or helpful to them. So we really want to make sure that we're keeping that in limited chunks. You can always push any child a little outside of their comfort zone to try to stretch a skill in any regard, and that includes sustaining attention. But on the whole, these children should be learning through experience. So little bits of online learning, breaks, making sure that we're curbing our expectations as adults. It's hard for us to sit on Zoom all day doing our work, so let's not expect that of our kids either.
Great advice. Okay, Dr. Lee, this question comes from Instagram. How will the coronavirus affect friendships? How do kids make friends and maintain them?
It's a really great question. I think that, again, it really depends on the child and what their strengths and limitations are. We know that a lot of kids are actually making friends and keeping friends virtually these days. There's a lot of outlets, a lot of platforms for them to be able to be social. And there's actually a lot of gaming and a lot of social interaction that kind of happens virtually. We also know that kids really benefit from that face-to-face contact, and they will also need those skills in other areas for interviews and their development down the line. So we want to make sure that they get a healthy balance. But I think it's really important to make sure that kids are also praised and that we give them positive attention when we see them doing the things that we want them to be doing more of. Goes a long way.
Which is kind of hard when you're stressed and you're homeschooling and you're doing all these things, to make sure we remember that our kids need to be told how terrific they are. Okay, Dr. Agalati, here's another question from Carolyn Larrabee in Middletown, Delaware.
Are kids who are in a natural transition phase in school, like starting kindergarten or high school or even starting in a new school, going to feel the impact of these changes to the normal school schedule more than kids who are already in an established peer group?
Well, I think any kind of natural transition, of course, it's something new to get used to, and they're already getting used to some transition in terms of online schooling or, whatever the case may be for their change in learning. But as I said, children are incredibly resilient. So give them some time, give them a little extra support and some TLC. Oftentimes we find that it's just best to meet your child where they are. Provide the expectations of what that's going to look like. However you can best prepare your child for what's coming their way will be helpful to them, just to make sure that that's a smooth transition. But they absolutely are capable of doing this. And I believe that wholeheartedly, that they are much stronger than we give them credit for.
Dr. Lee, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that it's a very challenging thing to either be starting something new or, it's different when it's well established and you've already kind of had the routine and you know what that's like. So I think it can really vary, again, depending on what's appropriate for the kid and what feels the most comfortable. A new transition might also kind of go along with new supports and new routines, which might actually be a little bit easier these days since we're trying to develop new routines, develop our new normal.
Yes, so Tom, this is our final question. It comes from teacher Marta Adan in Windsor Locks, Connecticut.
I'm a high school Spanish teacher. My question is, how do you think the new protocols and safety measures will affect the relationships between students and faculty and their mental health?
Great question. I worked in a high school for 25 years as a counselor. I was telling them earlier, I recently retired. So, again, human beings, we're pretty flexible. It's going to be different. Kudos to the teachers out there. And I think what's going to happen is that teachers and kids, I really hope that everybody's going to come together and that this is going to bring the teachers and kids to an even better level of relationship. But, the one concern definitely is the lack with kids being in a classroom. I'm not sure if they're going to be wearing masks or not, if teachers are going to be wearing their masks and so forth. And I understand the need for that. But there could potentially be a lot of the nonverbal nuances that are lost in the dialogue between teacher and children. But I really do believe, I want to believe that with all bad things that happen in society like this, that something good is going to come out of it, and that we're going to learn from this, and we're going to become stronger, teachers, kids, the administration, and the entire school system itself.
Well, thank you guys all so much. I think, grace for ourselves, grace for our kids, praise for our teachers. We now know what a hard job they were all doing. So thank you guys for this important conversation. I really appreciate it. It's such a good conversation with useful tips that all of us as parents can use. I want to thank our experts, Tom Kirstein, Dr. Lee, and Dr. Agalata, for all of your insight. And I will send it back to you, Craig.
We hope that the last hour has been informative and helpful. And one thing we can gather after listening to everyone who joined us is that more than ever before, we are all in this together. It is going to take a village to get through the school year. Thank you to Common Sense for collaborating with us on this special as well. And thank you for watching.